5 Sinister Road Trip Encounters that exposed haunting secrets and spine-chilling truths. Mark Johnson was convinced this road trip would heal his family's divided hearts. Bursting with excitement, he pressed in on the gas pedal, overtaking the sprawling cornfields etched against the Indiana skyline. Just picture it. A proper family reconnecting while cruising through America's forgotten towns, he exclaimed. But beneath the surface of his enthusiasm, unease began to thrum like an uninvited guest lurking in the back seat. As they rolled deeper into rural America, the decals of tranquility peeled back. Messages from the road surfaced, weathered signs hinting at ghost towns and ominous roadside tragedies. The stillness outside felt thick, like the world had held its breath. "Come on, guys. Let us stop at that diner," Mark suggested, eyes glinting with hope. But the flickering sign hung like a warning above the door. Unfazed, they entered. The air was cold, stale, and the soft creak of the floor made them feel as if they'd just awakened something long buried. "Where is everyone?" Lily murmured, pulling her phone from her pocket. No reception. Panic flared in her eyes. Mark shrugged it off, but shadows seemed to huddle in the corners of the diner, whispering. Goosebumps crept over Sarah, and Jake's curiosity led him to peek into the back kitchen only to find it in utter disarray, as if people had fled mid-meal. Then they saw him, the disheveled hitchhiker stationed beside the road. He waved, his smile wide yet unsettling. Just before Mark could slow the car, the man vanished as if he'd never been there. A shudder swept through the family. "That isn't normal," Jake whispered, wide-eyed. "Just urban legends, right?" Mark laughed nervously, but laughter too often masked fear that was creeping in. Shadows clung tighter as they left the diner behind. The air hummed a different tune, full of unspoken dread. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." They found themselves steered off by the promise of an abandoned hospital rumored to echo with eerie cries. The hallway inside was so white it stung their eyes, yet darker shadows flickered on the edges. The family wandered deeper. The silence turned oppressive, an invisible force closing in. Mark led them on, but their hearts drummed uneasily, the feeling of unseen eyes only intensifying. Finally, they stumbled into a town that seemed blissfully charming. Yet something was askew. The smiles of the townsfolk were too wide, too knowing. "We know your name," one woman cooed. Mark's heart raced. There was a heaviness in the air, a warning whisper lurking beneath their cheery words. As twilight descended, the veil of warm welcomes slipped away. The town pulsed with a secret, ripples of dark history embedded in each clenched hand and weary gaze. Fear gripped them tighter with every smile turned sinister. And as the shadows deepened, they faced the cold truth. Something was very wrong in this quaint town of familiar faces. Checkered past and ghostly presence intertwined, they had unknowingly wandered into a living nightmare. As the wind howled and the sky twisted in vivid colors, the Johnson family knew they might not find their way home after all. Would their fragile bond hold them together when nightmares emerged from the shadows? Or would they become shadows themselves, lost to the haunted legacy of this town? Something in the air shifted, a tension crackling like electricity, as dusk painted the town in darker hues. Mark shivered, a flicker of instinct urging him to flee, but confusion bound them. They stood surrounded by people, too unnaturally cheerful in the moody light, a haunting blend of familiarity and threat. "Let us just grab some food and keep moving," Sarah suggested, her voice catching. She shot a glance at Jake, his face pale, eyes darting around. Mark nodded, heart pounding in his chest, and they followed the townsfolk who beckoned them toward a dimly lit restaurant at the edge of the square. Inside, the walls were adorned with old photographs, portraits of smiling families from decades past, eyes glimmering with a strange clarity. Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. It was unsettling, those eyes watching them, knowing. They took their seats, and the waitress approached, an apron tied tight around her waist, her smile too wide. "What can I get you, lovelies?" she sang, her voice sweet yet hollow. Just some burgers. Please," Mark stammered, noticing the way her gaze lingered on Lily. The heaviness in the air thickened as the sisters exchanged concerned looks. "And some water." "No problem, sweetheart. Why, all are gonna love our food." The waitress spun on her heel, leaving the family to exchange nervous glances. Mark leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Something is off here. We need to keep our heads on a swivel." Just then, a shrill scream echoed from the alley behind the restaurant, cutting through the din of silverware and chatter. The family froze, eyes wide. Mark was the first to rise, instinctively protective. He glanced toward the alley, the cheerful chatter shifting into a hush, ears straining. "Did you hear that?" Lily's voice was shaky. There it was again, another frantic cry, there and gone, swallowed by the growing darkness enveloping the outside. He turned to the others, meeting their fearful stares. "We should check it out," Jake blurted out, his eyebrows knitted together with determination. But Mark felt a wall of dread settle in his chest. They didn't belong here. There was a darkness creeping in, poisoning the very air they breathed. "No, let us just eat and then we'll leave," Mark said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the cold sweat trickling down his back. He caught the sinister smile of the waitress as she returned, carrying a platter of food that looked too perfectly arranged, colors too vibrant. But there was an unsettling slowness to her movements, as though she carried a weight far heavier than the dishes. They each dug into their meals. Jake choked down a bite, not tasting anything. Sarah pushed her plate aside, the realization that she could not swallow another morsel sinking heavily in her stomach. "Did anyone notice the—" Mark started, but the waitress had come back, her head tilted, eyes wide as if expecting their response. A sudden crash sounded from the back of the restaurant, glass shattering, followed by a flurry of hushed whispers. "Keep it down," someone hissed from the shadows. The waitress smiled even wider, reframing the moment in chilling ease. "Don't worry, everything's just fine." With each passing second, Mark felt the desperation knot tighter, a creeping sensation that they needed to escape before whatever dark secret this town held found them. "What is happening here?" he finally managed to ask. A flicker of unease crossed the waitress's face. "You'll learn soon enough," she whispered, her voice slipping like sand through tightened fingers. They all turned simultaneously, their hearts racing, confusion blending with dread. Someone had to figure this out. Then, through the chaos, another voice rose, terror-soaked and frantic: "Run while you can." In a split second, dread sent chills down every spine. They grabbed each other's hands, instincts screaming to flee as shadows shifted around them. But where would they go? This place held secrets too dark to bear. And as the darkness began to surround them, suffocating and insistent, they realized the truth: they were not just trapped in a town. They were ensnared in a web of haunting pasts, and the light of escape was fading rapidly. What had they stumbled into? They had to know before it consumed them whole. The moment they heard the desperate warning, the energy shifted. Mark's grip tightened around Lily's hand, panic flooding his senses like ice water. The oppressive gloom surrounding them felt alive, pulsating as if the restaurant itself were responding to their fear. "Run!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking. He didn't know where the cry came from, but instinct drove him to move. Pushing the chair back with a screech that echoed hard against the wall, they surged toward the exit. "Wait, what about the food?" Sarah's voice trembled. "Forget the food. We need to get out of here," Mark yelled. The waitress's eyes glinted as they passed, her smile morphing into something grotesque. It was no longer cheerful but twisted and menacing, like a mask slipping to reveal a predator beneath. The air outside was thick and humid, pressuring their lungs. But the relief of the night breeze was short-lived. The square pulsated with dark shadows, and laughter erupted from a group nearby, too joyful, too inhuman. Mark's heart raced as he tried to assess their surroundings. Where should we go? Jake looked back at the restaurant, half expecting to see something emerge from the darkened doorway. Anywhere but here, Mark shouted, a primal urge forcing them toward the nearest alley. The screams from earlier faded into hushed whispers, almost mocking. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow space, shadows flickering from the dim streetlights. "Did you see her face?" Lily gasped, dread lacing her words. "What is happening in this place?" "Something is very wrong," Mark replied, the gravity of their situation sinking in. "The people, it's like they're alive, but not alive." Before he could finish, the alley seemed to close in around them. The laughter from the square had turned into a low chant, rhythmic and hypnotic. It wrapped around their ears, making it hard to think. Even beneath their fear, they could feel a draw, a sinister pull beckoning them back. "What is that?" Jake whispered, staring ahead. Shadows morphed against the brick walls, slinking into grotesque shapes. Mark squinted, trying to make sense of the dark figures shifting beyond the light. They pressed forward, the darkness growing heavier with each cautious step. The shadows curled and danced, revealing faces distant, familiar, yet stretched into grotesque expressions. Portraits from the restaurant. Every pair of eyes seemed to rise, locking onto theirs, hungry for recognition. Then, they heard it, a sudden crash of glass echoed through the alley, startling them. "What was that?" Sarah squeaked. "Let us move now," Mark urged, his instincts screaming. He led them deeper into the alley, desperate for an exit. But the shadows pressed in closer, tighter, until they could feel the prickle of cold fingers trailing down their necks. "Keep going," Mark urged, glancing back as terror slithered into his chest. The laughter had stopped, replaced with a low, haunting murmur, the voices swirling around them, a chorus of long-lost souls. Suddenly, a thick mist rolled in, cutting visibility to mere feet. Mark stumbled, his heart pounding. Then came a soft whisper, brushing against his ear, deceptively sweet, dripping with malice. "You're ours now," he spun, but there was nothing, just darkness. They stood frozen, the sound of their breaths mixing with the cold night air, which now felt charged with something sinister. "Did you hear that?" Jake's voice trembled, eyes wide as he scanned the swirling mist. "We need to go back," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. They could feel it, an overwhelming dread pushing down. Something was hunting them. Mark swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "We can't go back. We need to find a way out of this abyss." But the path was too uncertain, and the shadows beckoned. Nothing made sense anymore. Something terrible was happening here, and as the mists thickened, he knew that escaping this town was only the beginning. What awaited them in the dark? They didn't want to find out, but there was no turning back now. The mist coiled around them like a serpent, thick and suffocating. Mark tried to concentrate, to listen for any sound other than the pounding of their hearts. But the whispers had returned, subtle, relentless, slithering under his skin. A cold dread settled in his stomach. "Keep moving," he barked, though he could barely see Lily beside him, her face a silhouette against the haze. Fear gnawed at their resolve as they crept forward, shuffling uncertainly over rough ground littered with debris. "Which way?" Jake's voice was strained, crackling with urgency. Just keep going straight." Mark felt a pit forming in his throat. The alley felt endless, twisting and curling as if it were alive. And with every step, the eerie chant grew louder, a cacophony stirring the air around them. Suddenly, the mist parted just ahead. They stumbled into an open space, an abandoned courtyard, its walls crumbling under the weight of years. Moonlight streamed down, illuminating a forgotten fountain at the center, its waters long dry. The silence felt oppressive, thick as the fog that still clung to their skin. "Are we safe?" Sarah dared to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark glanced around. "I don't know. We can't stay here." But before he could finish, the shadows nearest the fountain quivered. A dark figure emerged, stepping into the dim light. A man with disheveled hair and hollow eyes, his clothes torn and dirty. He looked gaunt, as if he hadn't seen food or light in days. "Help me," he croaked, but his mouth twisted into a sickening grin. "You should join us, they're coming for you," panic gripped Mark as the figure lurched forward, arms stretching out towards them. Involuntary, they stepped back, hearts racing. "No!" Jake shouted, anger overtaking fear. "We can't help you. Get away from us, foolish mortals." The man laughed, his voice reverberating against the stone walls. "You don't understand. You're already part of this place, you've been chosen." The laughter expanded, echoing into unbearable shrieks, merging with the low hum of the shadows closing in around them. "Run!" Mark shouted, the instinct to survive reviving their sense of urgency. They raced toward the other side of the courtyard, but as they did, the ground beneath them shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed, revealing a void that seemed to pulse with darkness, hunger pouring forth from its depths. "No, don't!" Sarah gasped before a hand shot out from the fissure, grasping at her ankle. Felt clammy and slick. "Help me!" she screamed, panic igniting raw terror in their chests. "Pull her!" Mark cried, rushing forward, but a force struck him back like a wall, knocking the wind from his lungs. He gasped, the world spinning. Lily and Jake gripped Sarah's arms, but shadows snaked around them too, pulling them deeper into the courtyard's edge. They were trapped, ensnared in darkness. Mark scrambled, pushing himself off the ground, eyes wild with desperation. The whispering heightened again, the ground vibrating beneath them as if the very earth was alive, crawling, hungry. "Let her go!" Mark roared, fury surging through him. But the shadows only laughed, a chilling sound that struck fear in their hearts. The laughter grew deafening, punctuated by Sarah's frantic cries. Would they be dragged into the abyss with her? Battle-scarred and winded, Mark finally broke free, charging at the edge of the chasm. "Hold on!" he shouted, a miscalculated hope igniting beneath the overwhelming dread. But Sarah's cries echoed back, a relentless reminder that time was slipping away, and each second encased them deeper in despair. What awaited them next could be worse than anything they had faced. As Mark grasped for their weakened hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were watching, waiting to feast on their fear. Could they escape this nightmare? Could they save Sarah before it was too late? The shadows trembled, their laughter dripping with malice as Mark lunged toward the chasm, desperate to save Sarah. The void widened, its edges curling like hungry teeth, ready to devour both her and any hope they had left. Mark's heart raced, adrenaline flooding his veins as he reached for her. But with every inch gained, the ground shook violently, a warning of what lay just beneath. "Pull her!" he yelled at Lily and Jake, but their faces were pale and stricken with horror. The darkness flickered, almost breathing, and the very air around them felt heavy with despair. Suddenly, the grasping hand from the abyss released its hold on Sarah, almost as if it were waiting for the weakest moment to strike. She tumbled backward, landing hard on the cold stone floor, her eyes wide with shock. Mark seized the fragile moment, dragging her back toward solid ground. "Get away from the edge," Jake shouted, his voice strained as he fought to hold onto Lily, who was close to slipping into the abyss as shadows curled around her legs. With a surge of strength, they pulled Lily back, the shadows recoiling like scalded beasts. But even as they caught their breath, the courtyard warped around them, walls narrowing, closing in like a predator ensnaring its prey. Mark's chest was tight, a gnawing realization gripping him. The walls weren't merely a backdrop. They were alive. "Look!" Sarah screamed, pointing pale fingers toward the far wall. Shadows writhed and formed shapes, turning human-like as hollow eyes stared back at them. Faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams, echoed the chilling whispers they heard before, now a chorus of despair. "What do they want?" Lily gasped, shaking with fear. Before anyone could grasp an answer, the shadows lunged, gliding over the cobblestones toward them, a wave of darkness hungry for flesh and fear. The figures from the wall reached out, their fingers stretched thin and ghostly. "Run!" Mark shouted again, fear taking hold. They sprinted across the courtyard, the shadows nipping at their heels like ravenous dogs. The moonlight dimmed as if it too were afraid to witness the horror as they bolted. Mark felt a gripping on his shoulder, a moment that turned painfully slow. He turned, his breath caught in his throat. A woman, or what had once been a woman, stood there, her face a nightmare of twisted features and streaming shadows. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, voice dripping with malice as the ground beneath her shimmered with the dark essence from which she had emerged. And in that instant, everything someone might deem possible, every fear, threat, or haunting reality smashed into his mind. "What is this place?" he gasped, trying to back away, pulling Lily and Jake with him. "Eclipse," she said, her voice rising, a spine-chilling scream blending into otherworldly laughter. "It feeds on you, on your fears. And now you're part of it." Panic surged through their group. "We have to leave," Jake cried, glancing nervously around, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. They stumbled at the perimeter, seeking any way out, but the walls shifted and pulsed around them, guiding them back, reminding them they were trapped within a knowing embrace. "Look, there," Sarah shouted, pointing to a shallow door framed in darkness. The insights for escape were few, but this was something still linked to the world they knew. Mark didn't think. He dashed forward, the others close behind. The door swung open, spilling forth a blast of frigid air that made their skin prickle. If they could just push through, leave behind this claustrophobic nightmare. But as they rushed through the threshold, something stumbled behind them. The weight of shadows pressed in, darker than before. It was as if the mist itself clawed at their backs, reaching out to drag them back. The darkness howled, shrieking in furious desperation to claim its prize as they stepped through. But what lay on the other side? Was it freedom or another nightmare waiting to unfold? "Please," Jake's voice cracked, desperation clawing through the tearing sounds of wailing shadows. As they tumbled into the unknown, the door slammed shut behind them. Silence enveloped them like a shroud, thick and eerie. Mark turned, gasping as he realized they were not alone anymore. The air shifted, heavy with anticipation. What had they unwittingly unleashed? Could they escape this new realm before it consumed them whole, leaving nothing but echoes of their terror behind them? The stillness swallowed them whole. Coldness crept in, wrapping its fingers around their hearts, solid and unforgiving. Mark blinked, straining his eyes to make sense of the shadows that engulfed them. Unlike the frantic energy of the courtyard, this area was eerily quiet. A low hum buzzed beneath the silence, as if the world itself were vibrating with tension. "Where are we?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely a breath, trembling against the emptiness. The walls, smooth and slick like wet stone, loomed closer. They pressed in like the weighted silence of a tomb. A single flickering light bulb hung overhead, casting sickly, yellow light that only deepened the shadows. Where they had landed was a corridor lined with doors, each one sealed tight, heavy and menacing. "What now?" Lilia's voice cracked, scanning the oppressive surroundings. Mark took a step forward, bravado tinged with desperation. They had escaped the abyss, but the darkness here felt like a living force, a predator lying in wait. "We need to find a way out. There has to be something." As they moved cautiously toward the first door, a shiver coursed through Marcus' spine. The hum intensified, vibrating through the floor beneath their feet as if responding to their fear. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle, unsure if this was what they sought or a trap laid to ensnare them. "Wait," Jake said, sidestepping back. "We shouldn't open anything until we know what's behind it." But the walls began to whisper now, a faint, echoing call that twisted his resolve. Racked with uncertainty, Mark stepped back. Maybe Jake was right. In this bleak place, they might encounter something far worse than mere shadows. But almost as if in rebellion to their indecision, the wall directly across from them began to shift. It pulsed with a dark energy, swelling like a heartbeat, a grim invitation. Mark watched as cracks formed, the shadows bleeding through until grotesque faces pressed out against the stone, muffled screams of pure despair. They stumbled back, scrambling away from the advancing wall, but it was too late. The grinding creaks filled the corridor, sending vibrations through the air. "Run!" Mark shouted, darting forward, pulling Sarah and Lily with him. He heard Jake's feet pounding behind them, the sound of frenzied rhythm in the horror brewing around them. They barreled toward the far end of the hallway, a single door aglow with an ominous green light, beckoning them against the oppressive darkness. With every step, the whispers intensified, transforming into a cacophony of voices that clawed at their sanity. "Stay with us, come closer." Mark pushed through the door, praying for escape. It swung open, revealing a vast chamber, a theater of sorts, but grotesquely transformed. A stage dominated the space, drenched in shadows, and the audience seats lined with faceless figures all turned toward the stage with hollow, black voids where their eyes should be. "What is this place?" Lily gasped, taking in the horrific display. "It's a trap," Jake stammered. "We should leave." But the door behind them slammed shut, locking with a resounding thud that echoed like a death knell. Mark felt his heart hammering as the figures in the seats began to shift, slowly moving in perfect synchronization, their heads turning as if drawn by an unseen force. "Find a way out," Mark shouted, panic rising in his chest as he raised his hands defensively. And then their raspy whispers morphed into a chant, a sickening melody echoing in the chamber. "You shall perform, you shall feed part of us forevermore." The words coiled around him, wrapping him in dread, squeezing the air from his lungs. Mark turned back toward the door, frantically pounding, but it held firm. The figures in the seats leaned closer, hungry, their presence an oppressive weight. There was no escape, no hope. Just as despair began to settle into Mark's bones, a flash of light burst from the stage. It illuminated everything, terrifying masks, instruments drenched in dripping shadows, and scripts that shimmered with ominous words. "Are we the next act?" Sarah whispered, tears glistening on her cheeks. The stage loomed, inviting yet terrifying, and the audience held their breath, awaiting the performance. What awaited them in this dark theater? What terrifying act would they be forced to enact as the shadows laughed and the walls closed in? The air thickened as the whispers rose, intertwining with the pounding of Mark's heart. Each pulse of the sinister melody sent shivers racing down his spine. The faceless figures stared, their anticipation palpable. Mark could feel their feverish hunger gnawing at him, urging him to comply with their cruel demand. "What do we do?" Lily's voice quaked, weaving through the chilling atmosphere, grasping for opportunity while holding on to panic. But Mark had no answers. They were trapped in this grotesque nightmare, and the weight of the audience's silence felt heavy. He caught a glimpse of Sarah, her eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but the dread choked the words in his throat. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows at the side of the stage. It was cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured by layers of darkness. The audience stirred excitedly, the repetition of the chant spurring them on like a maddened crowd. "You shall perform, who are you?" Mark cried out, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, defiance clashing against terror. The figure tilted its head, and the shadows around it twisted and swirled as if responding to some unseen catalyst. It stepped into the flickering light, revealing a mask, a horrific visage of contorted pain and glee. "I am the keeper of souls," it rasped, the very sound scratching against Mark's sanity. "You must perform or become part of the act forever." "Perform what?" Jake shouted, backing away. "We want tea. We'll find a way out." "But there is no escape," the keeper replied, its voice a merging of 1,000 anguished cries. "Your essence shall serve this place. You can choose to dance, or to suffer." A surge of desperation ripped through Mark. He thought of the escape, but the walls felt alive, whispering deceitful reassurances, seeping poison into his thoughts. "We can't give in," he said, his voice shaking. But who was he trying to convince? Across the stage, shadows began to morph, swirling into grotesque shapes, forming a scene that hinted at their deepest fears. A looming figure of despair took shape. Mark saw his parents' disappointed faces, visions of failure stacked high before him, overwhelming him like a tidal wave. Sarah gasped, her own fears materializing behind him. Horrific specters danced in the light, taunting them. "Join us, feed the hunger," the audience chanted, the rhythm pulsing in time with Mark's heart. "No," Mark yelled, fighting against the crushing dread bearing down on him. "I refuse." But the shadows lunged forward. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around his limbs, squeezing tighter, as whispers escalated into a cacophony of twisted joy. He felt Sarah's hand slip from his grasp, pounding against the unseen force as she vanished into the edge of shadows. "Sarah," he cried, twisting to reach her. But she was gone, lost in the swirl. Jake shoved Mark forward. "We have to move. They'll take us too." They broke away, racing toward one of the shadowy exits, only to find it blocked by an unyielding wall of darkness. The encroaching figures loomed closer, their hunger palpable as they reached out with gnarled hands, impossible mouths stretching wide to consume the moment. "Think," Jake yelled, desperation sharpening his voice. "What do we do?" Suddenly, Mark spotted the scripts lying scattered across the stage. In that terrible moment, a thought pierced through the fear. The script. What do they want us to perform? The keeper's hollow laughter filled the air. "You must discover the truth within. Only then will the performance begin, and the final act unfold." Mark's heart pounded, caught between despair and chance. He reached for the nearest script, the shadows inching closer, clawing at his sanity. What truth awaited them in those yellowed pages? What horrors would they read that may lead to their salvation or doom? As he opened it, the theater trembled, the weight of the audience palpable, eyes unblinking. What awaited them on the pages? Would it be a path to escape or the beginning of their ultimate performance? A darker truth loomed ahead. Could they pay the price? Mark's hands shook as he flipped through the script, the yellowed pages whispering secrets long buried. Heart pounding, he scanned the lines, each word dripping with a sense of foreboding. The shadows licked at his feet, eager to claim him, to pull him into the darkness that surrounded them. "Read it out loud," Jake urged, his voice trembling as he stood protectively at Mark's side. With a shaky breath, Mark began to read. The words flowed like a dark incantation, heavy with meaning. To confront your fears is to embrace the shadows within. As the words left his lips, the stage shuddered violently, and the faceless audience gasped in an unison that echoed like thunder. Mark felt something shift in the air, a palpable tension that vibrated with the electric charge of anticipation. Suddenly, the stage transformed. The grotesque visuals that had tormented them moments before faded, replaced by haunting images of their own lives, their greatest regrets materializing in vivid detail. "Stop, please," Lily shouted, clutching her head as memories crashed over her. She was engulfed in a torrent of her own failures, haunted by images of missed opportunities and lost time, the shadows consuming her voice. "Keep reading," Jake pressed, panic creeping into his tone. "We have to finish." Mark forced himself to focus. Only by facing what you flee can you break the cycle. With each line spoken, the shadows writhed, their forms shifting, battling with the emerging truth from the script. The balance felt dangerously fragile. Jake glanced nervously at the keeper, its mask twisted with delight. "Our performance must be sincere," Mark cried out, desperation amplifying his voice. He could feel the weight of eyes upon them, the audience hungry for more than just mere words. They wanted a spectacle, a show. "Embrace your fears," the keeper bellowed, its voice ripping through the air like claws on glass. "Reveal them. Only then will you understand the truth." Mark hesitated, the thought of exposing his heart sharp with dread. But an urgency pushed him onward. "Yes, my fears. I fear that I will never be enough." The admission hung heavy in the air, and the stage trembled as if resonating with his hidden truth. Then, unexpectedly, a flicker of light surged through the cracks of darkness, illuminating a path ahead. It was frail but real. Jake grasped it quickly. "I fear losing everyone I love." Lily took a deep breath. "I fear I am alone in this world, that no one truly sees me." Their words echoed, filling the theater with a storm of emotion. Mark felt the shadows recoil, their grasp loosening as their fears were laid bare, the truth piercing through the fabric of the nightmare. Keep going. Jake shouted, his voice empowered. This is working. Mark swallowed hard. I fear the darkness within myself will never go away. The keeper's laughter twisted, transforming into something resembling rage. You are parading your weaknesses. This is not a performance. This is a condemnation. But it was too late. The shadows trembled, shifting away, the grotesque grip loosening. Each confession seemed to unravel the very essence of the audience's power. Just as hope flickered through the room, a thunderous clap echoed, drowning the fragile light. The shadows congealed once more, growing and twisting, reinvigorated by the keeper's fury. You may think you've found a way, it hissed, but each truth has a cost. The air thickened, pulling against their lungs. Panic surged back through Mark's veins as they grasped the full weight of what lay ahead. As more shadows surged, a deep, hollow laugh reverberated. Your truths will bind you, but only when the final act unfolds will you learn the true meaning of sacrifice. Mark's heart raced. What price would they have to pay? Were they unwittingly sealing their own fates with each revelation? The audience's chant returned, more frenzied than before. Dance for us. Become part of the act. The darkness drew closer, a tidal wave of despair crashing against their last glimmer of hope. Was their only escape entwined in the very shadows they fought to banish? What lay ahead in the performance that awaited them? Stay together, Mark shouted, but the walls began to shake as uncertainty swelled anew. His heart thundered as the shadows edged nearer, desperate for what they craved. Could they face what must come next? What horrors awaited if they dared to continue? The shadows lurched forward, their forms coiling and stretching like smoke given life. Mark could feel their presence, cold and suffocating. He gripped the script tighter, knuckles whitening, as another wave of fear washed over him. The audience's chants transformed into a monstrous hum, drowning out all rational thought. It was a chorus of demands, a relentless pulse of desperation. Mark, Jake shouted, his voice slicing through the chaos. We have to push through. There is something here. Mark remembered the flicker of light he had seen. Then we need more truth. He hesitated. His throat felt tight. But what more can we reveal? Everyone has secrets. Jake spat out, his eyes wide, almost frantic. Think. We need to expose the darkness for it to vanish. Your turn. Mark's heart raced. I fear that I will never forgive myself for what I have done. The audience gasped, the shadows recoiling momentarily as if they were struck. But a growl of anger burst forth from the keeper, swelling against the sound of the audience. Your weaknesses only serve to bind you tighter. The creature roared, claws raking the air in frustration. The wave of darker shades pulsed forward, wrapping around Mark. He felt claws on his skin, fear soaking into every fiber of his being. The grip was cold, paralyzing. But a surge of energy led him to shout again, we need to break free. I fear losing who I really am. The shadows hesitated. Light danced again, flickering between them as if desperately trying to break through. And then Mark understood the more they revealed, the more power they had over the darkness. But what would it take to finally sacrifice? Your secrets do not protect you, the keeper snarled. They only serve to imprison you further. With a shuddering breath, Lily stepped closer. I fear I'll never see the people I love ever again. Her voice trembled, cracking like glass, and the shadows screeched in harmonic frustration. We're getting somewhere, Jake shouted. Keep going. We can do this. Mark and Lily exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. They were cornered, but there was power in their unity. I fear, truly fear, the day I am left with nothing, Mark cried out, clenching his fists, feeling a rush of warmth dancing around him. The shadows writhed and twisted violently, angry at their resistance. But the audience seemed entranced, entrapped in the emotional web each confession wove. We shall return. The keeper howled, rage coursing through its every syllable as the darkness began to swell again, but scattered flickers of light cut through. Together, Jake shouted, desperation tinging his voice. We can do this together. Together the word echoed. Each fear unveiled took away the keeper's grip, but they had to summon the will to pierce the darkness lurking within. I fear that I will never escape this nightmare, shouted Lily, her voice now rising above the chaos. Enough, the keeper roared. Do you think this will save you? But it was too late. Light burst and surged. Mark felt it wash over him like a cleansing wave. With a grounding force, he accepted everything, the pain, the sorrow, his deepest fears. The truth was liberation. Suddenly, the stage twisted and morphed, the walls trembling under the weight of their revelations. The grotesque audience seemed to reel. Their forms swelled and shuddered, and they began to fracture, cracking like porcelain. It might work, but was it enough? Keep confessing. Mark pushed against the rising tide of shadows. But beneath his pulse, he felt something lurking, something watching. A cold awareness crept into the back of his mind. Were they awakening something even darker? What horrors lie beneath our truth? A voice whispered in the shadows, chilling and intimate, wrapping around Mark like a serpent. Mark's gut twisted. Fear twisted into a tight knot. Had they miscalculated? As chaos swirled, he realized the cost of their confession might be greater than they ever imagined. What additional nightmares awaited them if they dared to dive deeper into the abyss? Mark could feel the electricity in the air, every heartbeat amplified by the weight of anticipation. The darkness swirled, taunting them, yet the collective power of their confessions had shifted something profound. The walls expanded and contracted like a living thing, eager to absorb their fears. We're almost there, he breathed, desperate to push through. But doubt crept in, wrapping around him like a shroud. What if this wasn't enough? A flicker of unrest gnawed at him. We need to finish this, he urged, before it consumes us whole. Remember the last line, Jake shouted, pushing against his fear. We have to believe it has the power to free us. With the intensity of a storm brewing inside him, Mark took a deep breath. Together, we face this together, he exclaimed, gathering the strength to dive deeper. I fear I'll never forgive myself for leaving behind those I love. The words poured out of him, a torrent of anguish, and just as quickly, the shadows twisted in response, shuddering with depth. The keeper's laughter turned ominous. You think you're strong enough? Let the truth unveil your weaknesses. Armed with the belief that their revelations acted like a sword against the darkness, Mark turned to Lily. You too. What do you fear? I fear being alone forever, she shouted, tears in her eyes. The shadows convulsed, their inky forms recoiling momentarily. Say what you feel, Sarah, Jake urged, sweat glistening on his brow. Mark could see his friend teetering on the edge of despair. I fear never feeling loved again, Sarah cried, her voice raw, like a splintered mirror that shattered upon impact. Each revelation resonated within the theater, mingling with the cries of the audience. Shadows howled, teetering, driven mad by their confessions. But the shadows lurked, hungry and resolute. Mark could feel their anger swelling, pushing against their small sanctuary of light. Keep going. We need more, he shouted, fueled by their desperate energy. I fear I will become my worst self. Jake's declaration hung in the air. The response was immediate. The audience writhed in agony and shock. As their truth began to merge into a crescendo of shared fears, Mark felt liberation in vulnerability. Light burst forth like a barrier, repelling the shadows for now, but he could sense the keeper's frustration. This will not save you, it shrieked, darkness flickering around him menacingly. But they pressed on, hands clasped tight together, hearts pulsing in harmony. I fear the day I lose my own identity to this darkness, Mark shouted, driving the tormented chant on. And I fear never being seen, Lily screamed, invoking their darkest memories until it felt as if their unity would shatter the very fabric of the nightmare. The keeper lurched back, its twisted form spasming. You cannot escape what you have become. Watch us, Mark bellowed, fervency rising, trembling on the edge of what they had discovered. Every fear laid bare. We will face you. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the stage. shadows scattered like skittish animals, retreating in the face of overwhelming truth. The omnipresent audience recoiled, gripping the remnants of silence. The cacophony of their own fears had become a weapon against the darkness. "One more," Jake yelled. "We can do this. What else do you fear?" "I fear that I'll never be free," Mark shouted, voice breaking. "But I choose to fight for who I am. I am strong." The air shrieked in response, and Mark could feel the realities they had pieced together igniting, weaving a tapestry of light that broke through even the darkest corners of their nightmare realm. In that searing light, they stood united, a flood of warmth washing over them, driving back the encroaching shadows. The laughter of the keeper turned to a deafening wail. "You cannot defeat us," it screamed, but the truth was unraveling the very foundation of this dark theater. "Together we rise," Sarah shouted, echoing his resolve. And there it was a defining moment where every fear, every secret they had shared ignited reality, creating a storm of energy. The audience let out a collective wail, shadows dissolving under the pressure of light pouring forth from their souls. The world around them shattered, and a blinding brightness enveloped them completely, a liberating energy that surged through the cracks of their combined fears. The constant chant became a roar, cascading through the chamber like waves crashing against the shore. Then silence followed, a surreal stillness taking hold, the oppressive weight lifting. They tumbled through remnants of darkness illuminated by the orange glow of dawn, breaking free from the grasp of eclipse. A stark new world greeted them, the town that had been their prison fading into specters behind them. They emerged, gasping, sunlight warming their skin. Breathless, they glanced at each other, emotions raw but relief palpable. "We did it," Jake whispered, disbelief etching his features. "We escaped." Mark looked around, heart swelling. "We face everything together now." But somewhere deep inside, he understood the scars of the experience would linger, reminders of fears faced and bonds forged among darkness. Reconnecting as a family, they started the long journey home, stepping forward as a united front, brave hearts beating as one. It was time to confront whatever lay ahead, revitalized and emboldened against any nightmare that dared to emerge. And as they turned away from the ghost town, the shapes of shadows clawing at the world they left behind faded, swallowed by the light of a new dawn. Now it's your turn. If you found this ending terrifying yet uplifting, you need to subscribe now. Don't miss our next exclusive stories that explore the deepest crevices of human fear and resilience. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and let us know you're a true fan. Your support makes all the difference. Flood the comments with your thoughts, reactions, and theories. What did you think of their journey? And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this unforgettable conclusion. Your support matters.